What happened at the Reverie? I needed to know the answers to these mysteries, so I took a plane and traveled to real-life Marie-Joie in France and visited the real-life Pangea Castle in search of answers. So in this video, I'm gonna tell you about everything that I saw and, more than anything, explain what actually happened at the Reverie, from Shirahoshi's attempted kidnapping, to Karasu's awakened Logia powers, to the God Knights, and to the horrible truth of what Sabo really saw within the throne room. It's time to finally return to the Reverie. However, before that, I want to tell you about a special project I've been working on. 2 years ago, in the first episode of my Mega Theory, I brought up the idea that Luffy's true dream may be to throw the biggest party in the world. This is a dream I have shared myself as well, but I never thought it would have been possible until I was approached by a company who proposed to make this dream a reality. So, together with the help of an event company and other content creators from this community, we rented out the biggest guest house in the entire world to gather together hundreds of fans so we could throw the biggest party this community has ever seen. This is Nakama Fest, a 3-day themed festival featuring several group activities such as live reactions, sports events, premieres, concerts, a treasure hunt, and so much more. And to top it all off, we will be holding a massive party gathering fans and content creators from all over to celebrate the spirit of the series together. We are working hard with all staff to ensure that this event is both safe and enjoyable for any type of fan who wants to attend, so we encourage you to come along. The event will take place in Spain, just outside Barcelona, from August 18th to 20th. Please note that due to its location, large part of the event will be run in Spanish and will have Spanish-speaking attendees, but we're trying to build it in a way that anyone, no matter where they're from, can still enjoy the event, and all the essential and important information and help will be fully available in English. You can purchase tickets right now from the official website, which will allow you access to all activities, all meals, and a room for the 2 nights. Please be sure to thoroughly read all specifics, rules, and legal information before making an educated purchase, as the staff holds no liability for any damages. Tickets are bound to sell out quick, so don't wait too long. See you there at Nakama Fest. Okay, so back to the video. After half a decade, yes, I know, half a decade, we are finally getting back to the Reverie with a full flashback where we witness the battle between the 3 commanders and the 2 admirals. And our first point of interest here is finally finding out how Karasu fights, as after all these years, we are finally told how his fruit works. He has eaten the Susususunomi, or soot fruit, which appears to be a Logia that lets him turn into soot or tar, essentially burned carbon. In spite of this, however, Karasu is able to turn his Logia elements into living creatures. But how is that possible? Well, I actually already presented this idea back in my video about Return to the Reverie, but it is very well possible that while Zoan Awakenings provide transformations and Paramish Awakenings allow to affect your surroundings, Logia Awakenings allow the user to turn their element into living creatures. In fact, we've seen Akainu, Aokiji, and even Enel all transforming their elements into living creatures that moved on their own. So it's likely that Karasu is employing a similar strategy here, able to create living crows made of soot, which are understandably pitch black without any eyes or visible features, that can interact and even speak with others. Maybe it's not necessarily the awakening, but at least it's a technique that some Logia are able to use. We actually saw Karasu using this ability as far back as the Prey timeskip, with his crows being used to send communications to the Revolutionary Army, showing that he can extend his powers really far. We even see a great mastery over his Logia powers here, as Karasu can create several shapes, including wings that allow him to fly, or splitting his body into several crows. He also seems to not be affected by bullets, though we don't know if this is due to using future sight like Katakuri to dodge attacks, or if the government agents simply didn't have haki when shooting him. He also uses several new attacks here. His first is Karasusu, which is an obvious pun between Karasu or crow and Susu or suit. His next is Oberisusu, again a similar pun with suit but now combined with obelisk. And finally, Renkon, which refers to the shape of a lotus root, a Renkon, basically a cylinder filled with holes like the one Karasu is transforming into with his crows. However, the kanji is written as a group of souls, suggesting that all the crows are in a sense alive. On a small note, we also see the return of all the CP9 members. We already knew about Blue Non Khalifa through Film Red, but we also see Jabra, Fukuro, and Kumadori. Some people might be surprised to see them in CP0, but as Oda explained, the CP0 members with masks are the most dangerous, with those unmasked generally being more like foot soldiers. We don't know if the likes of Jabra here simply have their masks hidden away somewhere, but it would make sense that only Lucci and Kaku are considered the elites. During this time, we see the revolutionaries play out their 3 three main objectives, as Sabo neatly lays out at the start of the chapter. On top of rescuing Kuma and the other slaves where possible, their main objective was publicly declaring war against the Celestial Dragons, which resulted in the 8-nation revolution, though 4 failed to make this happen. These nations stopped the supply of their resources to Marie-Joie, as we learned that on top of the Celestial Tribute, countries also need to share their supplies and natural resources en masse for the Celestial Dragons, which on top of the revolutionaries destroying the pantries of Marie-Joie, makes them experience what it is like living without resources for the very first time, which for how greedy they usually are is bound to send Celestial Dragon society into chaos. This essentially creates a resources siege in which the revolutionaries put the government and Marie-Joie into a difficult chokehold. However, Dragon believes that this will fool the start of a proper conflict between these two forces once the Celestial Dragons start mobilizing the God's Knights, or Kami no Kishidan in Japanese. These are a fairly new faction to One Piece. They were previously mentioned in chapter 1054, with the Marines mentioning that the God's Knights would take care of San Carlos's attempted assassination, but some people understandably wondered if that was simply the name for the knights we've already seen around Marie-Joie. It's possible they could be a more elite subset of these knights, but Dragon's description seems to suggest they are an even more dedicated military force, one that may be potentially even over CP Aegis Zero, the already famous shields of the Celestial Dragons, which gives us an even better perspective as to how difficult it is to attack the Celestial Dragons, as not only can they summon the Admirals, but are even protected by both the CP0 and the God's Knights. Aside from this suspiciously Shanks-like silhouette though, there's really not much we can go off of here, and we don't know yet if this will be an actual elite group of named characters, or something closer to like the Orochi Oniwabanshu, so it's too early to tell. On a separate side note though, we are finally seeing all the plotlines of the Reverie converge, starting from the attempted assassination of San Carlos. Sabo notices that Charlos, alongside his father Rosvard and enslaved Kuma, is heading to the courtyard to attempt to enslave Shirahoshi again, after he tried to do so back in chapter 907, but was stopped by Saint Don Quixote Mjosgard, the celestial dragon who was redeemed by Queen Otohime. Shirahoshi is naively sitting in the mingling courtyard of Pangaea Castle tanking with Princess Mancheri, while Bonnie is instead rushing into the castle to save her father. At the same time, at the gondolas that go down to the Red Port, Lucci is trying to stop Vivi, who wants to go down to ask for Garp's help, as Garp was stationed at the Red Port during that time. Despite his intentions and his clear dislike of Vivi, it is still Lucci's duty to protect her unless asked so by the Celestial Dragons, but he doesn't want to understandably drag Garp into this, as he likely fears that will just make things worse for the Celestial Dragons. Meanwhile, Cobra goes for an audience with the 5 elders, while he sends Chaka and Pal to look after Vivi. This is all we are told within this chapter, which lays a lot of questions hanging about what really actually happened. But we don't need to wait, because we can already understand what happened simply by gathering all the informations that we've been slowly given over the past half-decade and putting the pieces of this Reverie-sized puzzle together. For starters, it is actually quite likely that Vivi was able to go down to get Vice Admiral Garp's help. After all, there is virtually nothing that Lucci could do to stop her, as he could only dissuade her as per his orders, at least I'd imagine. I'm mostly stating this because in chapter 956, we saw Garp having escorted the Neptune royal family back to Fishman Island. Though that was already his duty, it's possible that perhaps out of Vivi's request or some other reason he may have hastened their leave to protect them. However, I think it's also more likely that by the time Vivi got down to meet with Garp, the situation up top may have been resolved already, particularly since we had 2 forces, Sabo and Bonnie, crossing into Charlos to help rescue Kuma. This is also likely the moment when Sabo and Bonnie met that she mentioned back at the start of Egghead. It's likely in this case that it was Sabo himself who helped beat out Charlos in order to rescue Kuma, resulting in the supposed attempted assassination of San Charlos. This is because Sakazuki mentioned that the God's Knights were looking into this matter and trying to find the perpetrator, and since Dragon mentions in this chapter that Sabo will be the biggest target of the God's Knights, this could be one of the reasons why. It was mentioned that Saint Mjosgard helped the perpetrator escape, so he must have covered up for him, allowing the group to get away, with Bonnie heading for Egghead to find Vegapunk, and Sabo and the revolutionaries taking Kuma back with them. This all even fits, as Kurouma mentioned that in the eyes of the public, Sabo was the one pulling the strings behind all these headlines in the newspaper, meaning that the news likely mentioned Sabo as the one who almost killed Charlos, which only elevated his status as the celestial dragon killer, Flame Emperor. However, at the same time, it is possible that Vivi may have already left for the Red Port to ask Garp for help, and I'm mostly saying this because Morgans himself was situated at the same Red Port as Garp, so it makes this the perfect opportunity for her to sneak aboard his ship and escape. Maybe she heard of her father's assassination from a tip that Morgans got from his reporters, or something else triggered her sense of worry to the point that she had no choice but to escape with him to save herself. However, from Chuck and Pel's perspective, she went to the Red Port and vanished without a trace, as they could not locate her anywhere. Morgans helped propagate this story as a lie on the newspaper, as it benefited him to hide her for potential future profit. Plus, it just sells a good story, something that Morgans loves. This leads into the 3 main articles that Morgans published in chapter 956. The death that took place at the Reverie, which now is obviously Cobra's death, framed at the hands of Sabo, the votes of the Reverie resulting in the abolition of the Shichibukai, and the attempted assassination, in this case, of Saint Charlos, at Sabo and Bonnie's hands. We never got to find out what the headline the government tried to silence was though, seemingly not wanting him to publish one of these 3 articles upon the world, but I wonder if we'll ever find out which of the 3 it was. However, it's at this point that Morgans got a communication from Wapol, who's said to have had some incredibly valuable leaked intel, and he joined aboard Morgans' ship, much to the dismay of Vivi. However, what's interesting is that Wapol mentioned that if the government found out about his existence and what he knows, then they would erase him in a moment's notice. But then, what is it so dangerous that Wapol found out about that would cause him to be erased by the government? Well, there's only one secret that the government is that desperate to hide, and that connects all of these mysteries together. Because it's very well likely that trying to get revenge against Cobra, Wapol may have followed after him and witnessed something horrible, just as Sabo likely got into the empty throne room just as Cobra was having his supposed meeting with the Gorosei, wishing to ask about the secrets of an Poneglyph in Alabasta and the Void Sentry. This seemed to upset the Gorosei, who not only see the Nefertari as traitors, who didn't join them at Marijois, but if they found out that Alabasta has been secretly hiding a Poneglyph this entire time for all these centuries, then that makes them too dangerous to be left alive. This is likely what resulted in the assassination of King Cobra, with Sabo being photographed the moment he walked in on the scene in order to frame him as the killer and hide the truth. But as Sabo mentioned back in chapter 1060, what he saw within that room and the person who killed Cobra was not the Gorosei. It was someone sitting upon the empty throne, a hidden king ruling the world from the shadows, who at least after all these years, his secret identity has been revealed to Sabo, and potentially even Wapol too, who now potentially holds this information to the most dangerous person possible, Big News Morgans, to potentially unleash it upon the whole world, but Morgans is probably waiting for the right moment. But if imu-sama's secret might finally came to light, will that force their hand? We know that the government has been trying to gather weapons from the Wano country, which is the reason why they sent CP0 to Wano to have a dialogue with Orochi, with one of his men even claiming that the government is seemingly preparing for a massive war. Imu-sama is preparing to declare war on the world, which may potentially be what the Gorosei were talking about all along. A great cleansing is coming.